Chapter 2. By the end of this chapter, students will be able to
identify and compare safe behaviors to risky ones, analyze how factors influence health and behaviors, and demonstrate actions to improve health. In this chapter, we are going to focus on the why. We will overview factors that influence substance use and factors that can protect us against substance use. Before we jump into today's lesson, ask students to take 5 minutes to reflect on the following questions. Why might teens try substances in the first place? What are some risk factors associated with addiction? After 5 minutes is up, encourage students to share their reflections if comfortable. Risk factors can be categorized at the biological, psychological, familial, community, or cultural level. Risk factors can be associated with a higher likelihood of negative outcomes and can impact an individual as early as infancy. When we think about risk factors for addiction, we can break it down as developmental, biological, and environmental influences. Who we are, what we do, and what we are exposed to in our lifetime all have an impact on our vulnerabilities to substance use. Co-occurring disorders include a combination of 2 or more mental or physical health conditions. Researchers have found that nearly 50% of individuals who have a substance use disorder are also diagnosed with another mental health condition. A person experiencing anxiety, depression, or another mental health condition may turn to substance use to self-medicate. Although some drugs may temporarily help with symptoms associated with mental health conditions, they may make symptoms worse over time. Substance use may trigger changes to the brain's function and structure that could lead to the development of other mental health conditions. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are stressful or traumatic events, including abuse and neglect. ACEs are strongly related to the development and prevalence of a wide range of health problems, including those associated with substance use. The CDC Kaiser Permanente ACEs study is one of the largest investigations of childhood abuse and neglect. This study normalized the concept of addiction as ritualized compulsive comfort seeking. It's something one adopts as a coping behavior because they weren't provided with a healthy alternative when they were young. When children are exposed to chronic stressful events, their neurodevelopment can be disrupted. As a result, the child's ability to cope and function cognitively may be negatively impacted. Over time, the individual may develop unhealthy coping strategies, such as substance use or self-harm. There has since been an update to include additional ACEs beyond the original 10 ACEs identified. As an individual's exposure to ACEs increases, so does the risk of negative health outcomes. Research has demonstrated a strong relationship between ACEs and a variety of substance-related behaviors. In fact, each additional ACE a child is exposed to increases the likelihood of early initiation of illicit drug use by 2 to 4-fold. Exposure to ACEs may also predict the development of mental health and substance use disorders as an older adult. Finally, toxic stress or chronic stress in childhood negatively impacts an individual's ability to cope and leads to an inability to turn off the stress response in the brain and body. This long-term stress can lead to lifelong health problems. The COVID-19 pandemic affected each of us in unique and significant ways. The pandemic caused an increase in social isolation, anxiety, and fear, along with the number of health concerns associated with the illness. During the pandemic, we saw a drastic increase in mental health crises and substance use. Although we don't know the long-term impacts of COVID, we can see the influence it had on our mental health in real time. Characteristics that reduce a risk factor's impact or lower the likelihood of a negative consequence occurring are protective factors. Similarly to risk factors, protective factors can be categorized at the biological, psychological, or environmental level. Some examples of protective factors are resiliency, strong relationships with family, community, and school, high self-esteem, and opportunities for positive socialization.
When people feel stressed, they try different activities that they believe will reduce their stress. These are called coping skills. Some coping skills are considered adaptive or healthy, and others are considered maladaptive or unhealthy. When people try maladaptive or unhealthy coping skills, if it helps to reduce their stress, they will continue to use this method as a coping skill. These also happen on a continuum. Punching a wall can be a maladaptive coping skill, though if someone is working to be less violent and rather than hurting others they are punching a wall, this technically becomes a more adaptive way to handle stress. We can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. It's important to have skills to use at any time. For example, going for a walk may be calming for you, however it may not be an activity you can always do in the moment. Something that you can always practice in most settings include breathing. First is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. When our thoughts or situations start sending us into panic mode, this practice helps ground us in the present moment and can slow down racing thoughts. Have students identify 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Next is box breathing. This is a technique used when taking slow, deep breaths. It can heighten performance and concentration while also being a powerful stress reliever. Resilience is our ability to bounce back or adapt to difficult or challenging life experiences. These are 7 ways to build resilience. I am statements or positive affirmations is another way to describe a person giving themselves a compliment. Positive affirmations can help us think more positively about ourselves, build our confidence, and help us be able to tackle challenges. They should be short, positive statements that you can repeat to yourself out loud, in the mirror, or silently in your head. For example, I am strong. We know that certain risk factors, exposure to ACEs, or lack of healthy coping skills can all impact an individual's vulnerability to substance use. However, how you perceive or feel about a substance can directly influence your likelihood of trying a substance. Therefore, if you perceive a substance as more risky, you may be less likely or willing to try it. Substance use has been stigmatized in our society for many years. This stigma can lead to labeling, stereotyping, or discrimination. Individuals can also experience self-stigma and place blame on themselves and identify as being responsible for their disorder. We are now going to have students do a turn and talk activity. This activity asks students to turn and talk to their neighbor and discuss how does stigma impact people with substance use disorder. Words have power. It's important that we use language that frames substance use disorder as a health issue, not a failure of character, and shows respect to those who live with it and their families who are impacted. Here are some examples of person-first language that help counteract associated stigmas. Here is an exit ticket for students to reflect on what was just learned. Please respond in 1 paragraph. What do you believe society can do to reduce stigma associated with substance use and addiction?